Well, thank you all for coming out. I hope everybody's having a good day today. I'm Alex Armstrong. We'll get going with the petroglyphs here, and I think a good way to open a talk like this is to get really pedantic about word origins. So the stem petro, petrostate, petrodollars, petrochemicals, what's that mean? A lot of people will use it to mean oil, but that's actually inaccurate. The word petroleum is composed of two parts. Oleo means oil, petro means rock. So petroleum is rock oil. It's oil that comes out of the geological formations of the ground. Glyph, of course, means writing or drawing. So we've got, writings or drawings on rock, petroglyphs. Although they're not writing, it's not a writing system, they really are. It's more of an artistic thing. And to start with, I want to get into the people who made the petroglyphs in our area. Now, we have a lot of Native American history in this area, going back at least 13 or 14,000 years. That's pretty well established. You all might be familiar with the Adena mounds in the plains. Now, the Adena culture is a lot older. The Adena culture flourished, say, 1000 to 200 BC. The petroglyphs that we have are newer than that. Now, the Adena people could have been carving on rocks, but, 3,000 years of erosion means we don't have their carvings today. We are looking at a culture that archaeologists call Fort Ancient. Who flourished in the late prehistoric period. We're talking from about AD 100 up to the earliest European contact in the 17th and 18th centuries. So, from a European point of view, this was going on during the medieval and Renaissance periods. So, the Notre Dame Cathedral was getting built at the same time as these Fort Ancient peoples were making these petroglyphs. And the two images that I have over here, on your left, that village is an artist's rendering of a village called Sunwatch that has been reconstructed outside of Dayton. It is a Fort Ancient time period village that is based on archaeological excavations. You can go tour it. It's really cool. The image on your right is an artist's conception of how Fort Ancient dress might have looked, what it might have looked like when these people were out there making the petroglyphs. So that's, and the Fort Ancient people, there's some genetic evidence that links them possibly to the modern day Shawnee. This really is a lot closer to our documented history than the Adena people who built the mounds. This is a lot more recent in history. This is another thing just to illustrate some of the, it's not just the fact that older stones would have eroded. We have some symbolism that links the petroglyphs to Fort Ancient peoples. The illustration on your guys' right is of a place called the Alligator Mound, which is up in Licking County outside of Granville. And it doesn't depict an alligator, but the kind of oral tradition that was passed down about that mound is that it was, some kind of a ferocious spirit of the water. Well, people heard that and they thought alligator, but really it's probably a mythological being called the underwater panther, which appears in the folklore of various native cultures. You can compare the mound to this petroglyph that likewise is in a Shawnee tradition, supposed to be the underwater panther. You have this typical curling tail, a four-legged quasi-mammalian creature. So there is kind of artistic symbolism that links the petroglyphs we have to other aspects of Fort Ancient culture. What I want to do for a second is kind of go over some of the main recurring artistic themes or motifs that you see in these petroglyphs, and then we will get into instances of petroglyphs in our area, petroglyphs you can go visit. You see a lot of human form carvings, which is probably true of art all over the world. People like to reproduce the world around them, and a big part of human culture is humans. So on your right, you see an image from the Leo petroglyph, which is probably the most famous petroglyph site in Ohio. It's over in Jackson County. On the left, that's a little less well known. That is just outside of Huntington, up the Guyandotte Valley. but that's a really cool human form image. And you can see a person leaning on it for scale. That's a big carving. You see a lot of carvings in the form of animals. You know, of course, after humans, that's a really common motif to put in art forms. You know, they're often very stylized, but whatever, you know, paleozoologist was examining these ones from Browns Island finds something in that image where they can say, all right, we're pretty sure that's a sandhill crane. You know, obviously that one's a turtle, the other one. A lot of figures of animals, but you also find mythological beings. You know, I don't think that creature is something you would actually encounter in the woods of Ohio or West Virginia, but you know, that must be something that figured in the mythology or religion or folklore of the people who made it. And we have another image from the Leo petroglyph site as well. That first one is from up the Allegheny River. It's in Pennsylvania. So we have pictures of mythical animals, real animals. Another thing you see a lot is animal tracks. And, you know, that might tell you something about the culture who made these. These people, you know, hunting wild animals, that was an important food source for them. So if you're hunting, you're paying close attention to the tracks that are out there in the woods. That visual motif is of great cultural significance, and so it was reproduced in stone. I have some better photographs of animal track petroglyphs later on, but these are reproductions of rubbings that actually let you see it a lot clearer, so I wanted to start with that. Independent Slab is up in Cuyahoga County, south of Cleveland. The turkey tracks are from Coshocton County in the upper Muskingum Valley. You see turkey track petroglyphs a lot. That's a very common design element. As far as the, you know, European American perspective on these things, people have been interested in them from the very earliest days of white settlement in the Ohio Valley. I can't remember the name of the explorer, and I should have written that down, but one of the early explorers to come down the Ohio Valley in the late 18th century sketched these designs and sent them to President Jefferson, because of course Jefferson was, you know, avidly interested in all the kind of different aspects of natural and human history in at the time what was called antiquities. That was the term that was used for these, for the mounds, for any traces of the early Native American history. Yeah, Jefferson was requesting drawings. He was requesting that explorers, you know, delineate these things and send him images of them. And then petroglyphs really came to the public notice. In 1848, a lawyer and a postmaster, I think it was, from Chillicothe, Squire and Davis, published this volume, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. It was the first publication of the Smithsonian Institution, and it was the first publication that really showed the public all these incredible mounds and earthworks of the Ohio Valley, the great works of Chillicothe and Newark and the Miami Valley, but it also got into the petroglyphs. They were all grouped together as these antiquities. And so this is a great image. You can see a couple of guys on horseback here riding along the Guyandotte River. I showed you before that human form petroglyph from the Guyandotte Valley. That was illustrated in Squire and Davis's work in 1848. And that work became very popular. It was widely disseminated, widely read, got a lot of people interested in American antiquity and American prehistory in kind of the mid-19th century. Abe Lincoln was famous for, he read that book and he actually made stops on his way for his first congressional term. He made stops in the Scioto Valley to see the earthworks because he had read about them in Squire and Davis. Now we're going to get into petroglyphs a little closer to home. And I want to start with this one. It's the only recorded site in Athens County. Unfortunately, it's probably fake. So this Concord Creek is up to the northwest of Amesville. And this petroglyph was taken out of a rock shelter. It was cut out of that rock shelter by a gentleman by the name of Raymond Weitzen, who paid the local landowner for the right to cut it out of this rock shelter and take it up to Elyria, where Weitzen had a museum. But the opinion of both of the archaeologists that I've read who have examined this slab and commented on it. They think it was either an outright hoax or, farm boys in the 19th century doodling on the rock walls. And it's just because the stylistic elements of it don't look like other authentic petroglyphs that we know of, and the carvings are a little too sharp, which suggests they were carved by a metal implement rather than a stone or a bone or whatever implement. I have not been able to find out where this petroglyph is today. It was in this museum in Illyria. That museum closed, and the collection was auctioned off. I don't know where this slab is today, but it's probably not authentic, one way or the other. This one is from Fairfield County, and it's the same story. You find this a lot. It's a slab that was cut out of a rock shelter. This one probably is authentic. This was excavated by Boy Scouts in 1926. I believe it is in the collection of the Ohio Historical Connection now. But yeah, Kettle Hill was another rock shelter north of Lancaster. You see this sort of half human, half bird figure. That is the kind of design that you'll find a lot in authentic petroglyph forms. Who knows what the mythological function of that would have been. Over in Morgan County, this is a great one. I would love to see this site. I have not been able to get in touch with the landowner, but I have found some good pictures. It's called Council Rock. It sits on the bank of the Muskingum River. I do know that the site is now totally overgrown and forested, but you see in this kind of Edwardian period picture, that was all cleared farmland. This was quite a landmark in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And this boulder has all these wonderful animal carvings of turtles and lizards and who knows what all those creatures are. Some of them are likely enough mythological creatures. So if anybody knows whoever owns this site now and knows how to get in touch with that person, I'd love to hear from you. A lot of these petroglyphs used to be kind of semi-touristy landmarks. People would stop when they were traveling, stop and see them. People would go out and picnic and party and stuff there. And in a time where private land was a little more open to public use, a lot of them, that's much less so now. This is an example from Meigs County. The Saxon site was sort of down along the river, upriver of Racine. And this is one where, I think it was 1913, some officials from the Ohio Historical Society wanted to carve a slab of petroglyphs from somewhere to put in their museum, in their collection. And they found this site in Meigs County. They thought it was just perfect. So they carved these slabs out along with some others. And I think the site's probably underwater now. Modern dams have been built on the Ohio and really raised the water level up and buried a lot of these river edge sites. But by all accounts, these slabs are still in the collection of the Ohio Historical Society. For a long time, they were displayed in the museum at the Newark Earthworks. They're not there now. But I like this because I was able to find a decent color picture. You can see this bird design that was just cut out of a cliff face, and then a mythological being in that black and white picture, which is not quite as good, but it still illustrates well what that would have looked like. And then for the next portion of this program, I'm going to go over some places you can actually go visit and see these petroglyphs. And so by far the best known petroglyph site in Ohio, probably in the whole broader Midwest / Appalachia, is the Leo site in Jackson. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere to get to it, but there are good signs that lead you to it. And you get there's a little parking lot, this wood shelter that protects the petroglyphs from the rain. And they have been outlined, a lot of them in black paint, which archaeologists will weep and gnash their teeth about. It's not a good way to preserve. It was done a long time ago, but for the sake of the visitor, it does help you to see them carved in the rock. This design right here, this face with horns and bird's feet, that is probably the most famous image of petroglyphs. You see this in a lot of history books and stuff like that. I've seen it on T-shirts. That's really an iconic picture of Ohio prehistory. And that one I've read speculation, and it is only speculation, but there's a creature in the folklore and the mythology of various Iroquois peoples that's called the Great Flying Head or something like that, and it's a some kind of mythological being. It's not a pleasant being. It's a scary figure. It's don't go out in the woods at night. The flying head's going to get you. And some scholars have speculated that that image there might relate to this flying head entity. But that's the kind of thing it's easy to speculate. It's hard to go beyond speculation. We don't have written records, unfortunately. So the Ohio History Connection manages the Leo site. Another site that they run is up on Kelly's Island. It's called Inscription Rock. What you have here on your left is a 19th century illustration of all the petroglyphs that were visible on this boulder, which sits right on the shore of Lake Erie. I mean, right on the shore. And it's under a little shelter too. Unfortunately, that shelter did not do enough to protect that slab from all the weather coming off the lake and the ice and the wind and the rain. And I was up there in May. You can't see a darn thing. You cannot tell there were carvings on that rock, or at least I couldn't. Maybe if you really came when the lighting was just right, or maybe if you took a rubbing or something, you'd see it, but I couldn't tell that anything was there, which is it's a shame, but at least we do have these old images that were created from rubbings when the carvings were more visible. What that does tell you is how quickly these images erode. Kelly's Island is limestone. It's not, this crummy, erosive sandstone we have around here, but even so, that carving was visible in the 1800s. It's not visible today, and so that gives you a sense that it might not be super duper ancient, maybe a few hundred years at most. Leo and Inscription Rock are both very well-known Ohio History Connection sites. This one is not. If you asked somebody, what petroglyph sites are managed by the OHC, this one might not come up because it's not the main attraction. There's a park that commemorates the Fallen Timbers battlefield. Now, Fallen Timbers was the key battle in the Northwest Indian Wars. General Wayne was off fighting Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, and Fallen Timbers was the battle where the Native Confederacy really took a bad loss, and that led to the Treaty of Greenville, which opened Ohio to white settlement and all of that. Anyway, the park is dedicated to the battle and to Wayne and to the Indian War, but there is a petroglyph there. It's off to one side of the park. It's not very prominent. There's this little monument to, I think a Miami, don't quote me on that, I think a Miami leader called Turkeyfoot. And so the legend goes, Turkeyfoot was wounded in the battle. He knew he was pretty sure he was going to die, and supposedly he carved, you can see it in this older image, he carved these turkey feet into this boulder, as his signature, his last monument or whatever it may be. And that rock is in the park. For many years, people thought that carving had worn away off the rock because you see this old image, it's right there. Can't see it in the new image. And then a scholar who's studied these petroglyphs, James Murphy, discovered that the rock actually got flipped over at some point. The carvings are still there. You just have to crawl down on your hands and knees and look at the underside of the boulder, which probably does a great deal to protect them. They'll probably last longer that way. They are still there. And so that's a more modern one. Turkeyfoot, in all likelihood, would have used a metal implement to carve those, and so that goes to show you can't totally rely on, this looks like it was carved with a metal implement, so it must not be authentic. Well, there was a 100-year period where the natives in this area did have access to iron tools and steel tools. And then a few sites that are kind of just out there. They're hard to find much about, honestly, because they're not managed by a big organization like the OHC. A really, really cool site is Independent Slab in Cuyahoga County. This petroglyph slab, it's big. I mean, it's probably wider than my arm span. It was discovered by quarrymen in the 1850s. It was buried under topsoil. The quarrymen were cutting stone to build a church. They realized, there's some carvings on these stones we're cutting. The local minister who led the congregation that was having the church built said, hold up, stop the quarrying, we need to save these carvings. And he had them set He had the cutout, whatever was left of the carving, some of it did get quarried away, but he had this big slab cut out to preserve it and then set high up into the back wall of this church. And that's still there. Since then, the church has expanded and built kind of a event space onto the back of itself. And so this is now totally enclosed, indoors, protected from the elements, but they'll let you go in and take a look at it. It's kind of an attraction. I don't know if you can make out in this picture. This is the picture I took, and I was kind of holding my phone camera way up, so it's not a great picture. This one, the contrast comes out really great. Look at this. This is some kind of crustacean, like a crayfish or something. But then you can also see deer tracks, mammal tracks, a lot of different things in that one. I think it's a really cool story that some Presbyterian minister in the 1850s had the foresight to say, we need to preserve this carving. That's a part of ancient history. A great organization that really does a lot with relatively small resources to protect our ancient heritage is the Archaeological Conservancy. They were pretty instrumental in saving one of the mounds up in the plains that does have formal protection on it now. They own a site in Belmont County called the Barnesville Track Rocks, and it's called the Track Rocks because there are tracks carved into it. And so this site is normally not open to the public just because they haven't had the resources to develop a trail or a parking area. It really is just off this way out in the sticks country road up in Belmont County. The local historical society up there in Barnesville, they will do an event once or twice a year where they do have a day where the public can go up and see it. They had an archaeologist down from ODNR, I went to this a couple summers ago, who did a little presentation about the history of the Track Rocks, and then everybody drove in a great big line, and the archaeologist kind of led us down all these country roads to go see it. But you have the tracks, you have lots of other things. You have a little face down here. I took this, the lighting was actually great. It was kind of this low lighting that let a lot of these carvings come out. You see this kind of spiral, concentric circle figure that has goodness knows what significance. This is a great site. I talked to an older lady on this tour who had memories of, there's a prominent Quaker school near Barnesville, and I don't remember if she went to the Quaker school or what, but the archaeologist was saying, this was a site where, or he was speculating about how these petroglyph sites could have been places where, elders would teach children about, the ways of our culture, the ways of the world, this might be a site where you learn about, kind of learn about the birds and the bees. And this older lady was remembering all these parties that people used to have out at the Track Rocks and said, yeah, it's definitely a spot where we would go to learn about that. It still has great cultural significance, however many hundred years on from its creation. Another kind of local historical society that is fortunate to have one of these in their collection is in Sero, West Virginia, which is near Huntington. It is just to the west of Huntington along the Ohio River. This slab is very well preserved. This was dredged out of the Ohio River by a company that was building a loading facility for a chemical company, for barges on the Ohio. They dredged this up in a big clamshell bucket, and once again, somebody said, wow, that's something significant. We have to preserve this. And so the Sero Historical Society was actually formed specifically for the purpose of caring for this petroglyph slab. The city donated a little building to display it. They built up another, a whole collection around it. They've got Grandpa's Army uniform and all the local glassware and stuff, but it really was built around this petroglyph slab. So you can see bird designs, all these abstract, intersecting, flowing lines. Goodness knows what that signified, but you see that a lot. And this slab, because it was buried under river silt for who knows how long, it's about the best preserved petroglyph you can go see. If you get the chance to get down to the Huntington area, look up the Sero Historical Society, look up their hours. I think it's free to go in too. Well worth a visit. Very impressive thing to see. It's big too, it's big. A little closer to home, if you don't want to drive all the way to Huntington, go down to Point Pleasant. Two Endy Way State Park is right at the confluence of the Ohio River and the Kanawha River. Beautiful spot, sit there, watch the boats. They've got all these French apple trees that were donated after World War II. They've got a very early log cabin museum you can tour. And they have, I showed a picture of this, one of the first couple slides of the presentation, the water panther stone. So this was found in Leon, West Virginia, which is just a few miles up the Kanawha River from Point Pleasant. And it was used by an early settler as stairs to go up to his cabin. It was probably carved out of the bank of the bed of a stream. The picture I showed before was a lot better because the carving had been highlighted. I can go back to it real quick. That's what it looked like when somebody chalked the creature into it. And that chalk marking has faded away, but if you go to it and kind of get down and really look at it, you can see it. It's there. They actually just built a new little shelter to house that, try and protect it. There it is. It sits in this its own little log cabin, you know. And people, the really interesting thing about this one is people, every time I go there, people are leaving offerings and stuff on top of this stone. So you can see all the coins on it. You can see some nice little botanical floral thing, and then you'll find, I found cigarettes and I found loose tobacco, and that's really interesting because that has such deep significance to so many native cultures. You know, a tobacco offering, that's really significant in all these native cultures, and you find that on this petroglyph stone in Point Pleasant. I found crazy things. I found, gospel tracts and UFO tracts and drawings and carvings and this. I found like an apple that had all these voodoo pins stuck through it and stuff. It was. I would love to know who is doing that and love to get to talk to them. That's that's the accretion of cultural discourse in the landscape right there. Another site in West Virginia. This one used to be down at the Blennerhassett Museum in Parkersburg. It used to be a lot closer to home. It is now housed up in the West Virginia State Archaeological Museum in Moundsville. It's a little bit of a drive, but that's well worth a visit. You get to see the largest Adena mound, a mound 70 feet tall, if you can imagine that. And right next to it sits this wonderful museum that has this petroglyph slab in it, and they have all the carvings highlighted with, salt or something. So it's not something that's going to permanently alter the stone, but it does let you see this, dancing humanoid figure. I mean, is that a frog or something? There's different types of tracks. This is a pretty cool one up in Moundsville, West Virginia. It was discovered in Wheeling, and then it's Moundsville is not far from Wheeling, but I wish it was still in Parkersburg. It'd be easier to go see. Another museum you can go see if you're really interested in petroglyphs is the Ohio Ceramic Museum in East Liverpool. They just happen to have a wonderful collection of rubbings that were taken in the early 20th century before the modern dams were built on the Ohio River, of this extensive series of petroglyphs that were in boulders along the river that are now underwater, but the designs were preserved on charcoal rubbings that are now housed in the Museum of Ceramics. So technically the petroglyphs are still there, but for all intents and purposes they're lost, but the designs are preserved for anybody who wants to, study the symbols or the art of these things. Yes, that is a direct rubbing of somebody put that cloth down on the rock and rubbed charcoal over it, So that is the scale that it would have been. So those, and actually a lot of other petroglyphs, unfortunately, are lost beneath the Ohio River now. Another lost petroglyph was up in Licking County along State Route 161 in Newark. They were widening the road, I think it was in the 60s. They were widening the road. There's this big rock cliff that has all these petroglyph designs in it that was going to get blasted away. So some concerned local citizens went and they hacked out some chunks of it, which is, it's a shame to take these things out of their original context. But if the cliff is going to get blasted away anyway, I can really sympathize with these guys' motives. These petroglyphs ended up in the Licking County Historical Society. You can see this picture here. There's a face design and a hand design. And I went up there and I was talking with the people in charge of that, and they were really interested. They hadn't heard of this. They didn't know that these had been in their collection. And so the director, he was really interested. He said, he was going to talk to some of the volunteers there, really try and search through the archives, search through the attic. But as far as I know, they never found them. So who knows, some unscrupulous volunteer at some point over the years might have taken these home. Goodness knows. One of the last things I want to address here is other forms of rock carving that you might encounter in this area. One of the most common is over here. Popularly, you hear these things referred to as nutting stones, the idea being there are these circular pits and you could place a nut in that and crack it with a rock. Now, probably the indigenous people of the area, probably they would have processed hickory nuts, walnuts, stuff like that in that way, but archaeologists will call this a mortar rather than a nutting stone because you could grind a lot more than just nuts in there. You could grind other seeds, you could grind roots, you could grind up minerals for paint. I have an example of one of these just to give you a little real-world visual aid. This is a nutting stone that was found down by Pomeroy, and this little round rock was found with it. So you see it has these circular divots. It's actually got a deeper one in the other side. This little round rock fits right in there, and you can grind up, whatever you want. So this is a utilitarian item. This is not an artistic rock carving, but it still is. It's an enduring feature of our landscape that is of native origin. Another interesting one, this is up in Hockin County. If anybody knows Clear Creek Metro Park, beautiful area, incredible flora and fauna. But if you drive way out Clear Creek Road, past most of the park facilities, you'll come to this huge rock shelter where the sandstone has all these different minerals, all these iron and magnesium compounds leaching through it, gives it all these crazy colors. It's called Written Rock. And in Written Rock, there's this rock that outcrops kind of right from the floor of the rock shelter, and it has these grooves in it, and those have been interpreted as a place where implements would have been sharpened, arrow shafts or goodness knows what. They call it a polissoir, which is a French word, but yeah, all these different grooves. So again, utilitarian item, not necessarily artistic, but it is a trace in our landscape, kind of etched in the stone. Sometimes, I've already touched on the Concord Creek one, kind of a case of mistaken identity where somebody, I think, really wanted to believe that it was an authentic Native American artifact, but it wasn't. One of the most famous of these cases of mistaken identity is from down in Portsmouth. There was a rock, it was called the Indian Head Rock, and it became a famous landmark because it was this carving of a human face, and it could only be seen at low water, so it actually became of great importance for steamboat operators. You're going down the river, and you know that if you can see the Indian Head Rock at Portsmouth, you better be careful, because that means the river's very low. And when the river would get low enough to see it, everybody would go get in a rowboat, take a picnic. It was a big deal. You find so many historical images of people in Victorian garb posing in their little boats by this boulder. I mentioned Squire and Davis, 1848, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. They described this in their book, but Squire and Davis, they were trying to cover a lot of ground, and they had never seen it. So they described it based on kind of secondhand accounts from people they had spoken to in Portsmouth. Somebody told them, yeah, there's this head in the water, and that changed into there's a bust in the water. And so based on the description they published, this painter, John Egan, he made this huge 360-degree cyclorama painting, took it on display. It was basically a fairground attraction of all the mounds and the earthworks and the petroglyphs in the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. That's in the St. Louis Art Museum now. He read Squire and Davis's account that there was a bust of a head in the river at Portsmouth, and this is what he painted. Well, this is what it really looks like. A lot of embellishment. This rock was dredged out of the river about 10 or 15 years back by scuba divers. It's a crazy story. There's a whole documentary, but between a rock and the Commonwealth about how this diver dredged it up, and then the state of Kentucky sued him because technically the riverbed belongs to Kentucky, and there was this legal back and forth, and it was under armed guard in the township garage in Ohio, and then it was under armed guard in the township garage in South Shore, Kentucky. Well, Kentucky finally got the rock, but it is on display now in a little shelter in a park just across the river from Portsmouth. You can go see it. Kicker is, it's probably not of Native American origin. It's probably a very early pioneer carving, which is still pretty cool. The date on it, 1856 there, that is not the date of the carving. People would leave their initials all over this rock. You see all kinds of dates. But probably that carving dates to the very earliest period of white settlement in the Ohio Valley, so it's still of historical interest. But it's probably not an authentic native petroglyph. I don't know, I like all the funny little stories about that. Other types of carving you'll find out there in the woods if you go looking for petroglyphs, you'll find all kinds of stuff. You'll find Masonic symbolism. I don't think that the Fort Ancient people were carving that. One thing that maybe a little more honestly does get mistaken for native carving is stuff like this. This is at the Visitor Center, or the Nature Center for Hocking Hills at Old Man's Cave. They found this in the creek bed right by Old Man's Cave. It is a tar burner stone. So you'd take a big horizontal slab of sandstone, you would make a carving of different channels that all led down to one central channel. You would grub up the roots of pitch pine, pile them on there, cover the whole thing in clay, and build a fire over it. And the heat from the fire would force the tar out of the pine down these channels and drip into a bucket or whatever, and that tar was a really valuable resource on the frontier. You could make all kinds of stuff out of it. You could make soap, you could seal things. And obviously that was replaced by industrial processes pretty early on, but during the real early pioneer period, the other thing they would do is they would leach ashes on a stone like that to make lye for soap. So you'll find tar burner stones and lye leaching stones, and that one's a really elaborate one. Some of them look just like a turkey track, which of course you do find a lot of authentic petroglyphs that are turkey tracks. So people confuse those for native petroglyphs a lot. But it is also just a cool historic artifact if you're up at Old Man's Cave. So those are kind of more honest mistakes, but you also find a whole lot of hoaxes around this stuff. Down in Sero, they have this stone that has runes carved in it. People love to carve runes into stones and say that Grandpa dug it up on his farm when it proves that the Vikings were in, Texas or Minnesota or wherever. There were Vikings in North America. There's a very well-documented archaeological site in Newfoundland that is a Viking site, but, how far did they get? That's the only really authenticated Viking site in North America. So you find all these runic stones, they're not the real deal. But there is a whole genre of petroglyphs that you find down in West Virginia and Kentucky. Check this one out. All these kind of tally-esque markings, it just so happens that this does bear a lot of superficial similarity to an early writing system used in Ireland called Ogham. And so there's all kinds of speculation of these seafaring Irish monks who fetched up in West Virginia. And, I don't read, I'm not an expert in early Irish paleography, and I don't think anybody who was finding these stones is either. It really does superficially look very similar, but it's not too hard to come up, goodness knows what significance this had to its carvers. They were not Irish monks, but it's also not too hard to come up with that sort of a design that would end up looking similar to somebody who's not a specialist. One of the most famous hoaxes of, trying to provide an alternative explanation for early Indian history was out of Newark. This doctor claimed he dug up all these early Hebrew stones in a mound in Newark. This is a replica of one of them that has the Ten Commandments carved in it in early Hebrew. People have been trying to pull this stuff off for years for various, sometimes just for fun, sometimes for attention. In this case, it was supposed to be an early way to discredit slavery and suggest that, well, look, all the races of humanity have a common ancestor, which is really a noble goal, but it's also inadvertently quite racist to suggest that the mound builders, the early ancestors of the modern Indians of the Ohio Valley, to suggest that they didn't have the capacity to build these huge monuments. It had to be Vikings or Hebrews or Celts or whoever. So I don't know, come take a look at this later if you want to. The hoaxes are everywhere. That's all I have for you. Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to anything if you want to see anything again. But thanks all for coming, everybody. Yes, sir.
Have you published any work about this?
No, I'm no expert or anything. I'm a hobbyist about it. There are good published books. Unfortunately, they're not hard to find. They're all out of print and stuff. I have the only book on petroglyphs in Ohio. James Swagger. This was published by OU Press, and it goes site by site and goes through really all the available information about all these sites. If you ever can get your hand on this book, it's a great book. Unfortunately, it's out of print. It's hard to find. There's another one, I think it's also by Swagger, Rock Art of the Ohio Valley. There's some less reputable ones about West Virginia and stuff. People love to get more into the mythology than is necessarily responsible with some of these things. Yes, sir, it is it's James Swagger, Petroglyphs of Ohio. Swagger that's Swauger. Yeah, I wish there was more readily available kind of popular literature on the prehistory of the area, because as evidenced by this crowd, people are interested in it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, a lot of that necessarily has to be speculative, but, think very generally about the function of art in human culture. People do that to kind of reinforce all the different narratives that make up culture. We know that a lot of Native American societies, different cultural groups would be identified by animals. We're the turtle clan, those guys are the bear clan. So I think it is not too unsafe to guess that might have been one of the functions, that people would get together and sit around this boulder and carve a turtle and tell whatever the stories were that the turtle clan told to each other about, this is us, this is our history, this is who we are as a people, what we've done, who our heroes were, goodness knows what. Art has that function in society, but also on a simpler level, people love to depict the world around them. What's that cave in France, Lascaux or something, where people are just, they're painting all the game animals that were important to them, that they hunted, that they saw. People all over the planet, every culture, every place and time, they depict the things that are important to them, the things that are prominent in the landscape around them. So I'm sure some of it's really as simple as that. I think you see enough pictures of crazy beings that don't exist in real life. What's that? It's an airplane. I don't know. It's not an airplane. I think you can say quite safely that some of these petroglyphs do depict mythological beings, because they're clearly some kind of an animal, but not an animal that exists in the real world. This had a mythological function. What you can't do is say just what that function was, unless there's a little bit of oral tradition that comes down from historically documented Native American sources that you can start to maybe peek into the mythology on a more specific level. So this image here from the Saxon site, can you see in this grainy picture, this creature has a line going from its eye into the middle of its body, and then it has a circle. That's a motif you see a lot. And there's documented sources where, early Jesuits or something wrote down from the existent oral Native American, I can't remember what tribe or nation it was, but I think this is common to a number of groups, that said this line represents kind of the spiritual energy of a being. When you draw a line from the eye or the mouth up to a circle in the center of the body, that represents the life force or the spiritual force of that creature in some way or another. and you do see that a lot. So you get little glimpses, little hints, not a lot, unfortunately. Thanks again. I'm glad you could all come out.